They're not very smart until you make them smart. Now, unfortunately, as trappers, none of us are perfect, so you're always gonna have a smart one. But that's not necessarily the ones that I'm trying to catch anyways. I'm just trying to take the cream of the crop off and move on. So I'll start with my number one set here. It's gonna be a TS85 on a drowning rod. I run all 1/2 inch drowning rods. I've seen what they can do to this, and I won't go any smaller. And I won't use fiberglass either. I know a couple guys that have had beaver actually bite through them or break them off. So I like to stick with this stuff. It hasn't failed me yet. Then we just got a washer on top, and then you gotta have something down here to stop that slide lock. Peg ground lock. I J-hook all my traps on there. This one actually needs closed a little bit more, but I J-hook them all on there, and I can get about 100 of these in the back of my truck at a time. And I run them basically straight back in the bed of the truck. And I leave them attached like this, but if you stack them right, you can pull out 2 at a time and it's not a tangled mess. So, and then we're running the TS85. In my opinion, there's a lot of debate on it, but in my opinion, the best beaver trap hands down for what I'm doing. Again, this is all the stuff that I do. It's what works for me in my area. So we got our TS85, about 4 to 5 pounds of pan tension. This one needs adjusted a little bit. It had a long year, but that's kind of my foothold setup. I use 30-inch T-bars or 24-inch, just a regular washer on the top of that stake. They're both 1/2 inch too. Depending on where I am, there's some spots I could use a 10-foot stake and they still won't hold, but that's what I'm using the stake. And I'll try and not fall on my face here while I'm getting in here. But some of you guys might want to come around the back here if you want to. I think it's going to be a lot easier to see from back there. But as far as what I'm doing, I want a fairly steep bank. I don't want something like, if this was all dirt right here, I'm not going to set anything on that at all. I want something fairly steep. This is actually just about right for what I prefer. Get down in here. What I'll do right away is I'll kind of, if I can get a trench dug in here. Not really a trench, but more or less just kind of notching out where my trap's gonna go. And then I'll push that mud I pulled off down where I'm gonna put that bed. This stuff's got mesh underneath of it, so it's kind of a pain, but I'll do that. And then for me, one of the most important things, in my opinion, for beaver trapping is having something for them to look at. And what I use for, if I can get it, is a big old pile of mud. That's pretty small for what I like. Try and get some more here. Some good clay. I can tell you I'm not gonna be able to get the stake out when I put it in. But we'll throw some mud up here. And this is kind of, if you guys can see, I've almost made like a chute. It looks like a beaver's been sliding up there. But the last thing I'll do before I get my trap in there is I'll actually take my hands and I'll leave fingerprints all over this. I find that it looks just like a beaver's hind foot, like one just climbed up there. Whether that's crucial or not, I don't know. It just makes me feel better about it and makes me confident in the set. So that's kind of how I start it. I like to start with this part simply because it all depends on the area. Our creeks in Iowa are such a pain as far as consistency on what kind of dirt you got in them. So I always like to find the spot with mud and a good bank, and I'll kind of go from there. So my drowning rods, ooh, I'm slipping, vary from 8 to 10 foot. Certain locations it's definitely nice to have a longer one. Certain locations definitely nicer to have a shorter one. But I got all mine. It was scrapped from a construction site, so it was pretty cheap. Price of metal ain't cheap, so it's nice to get pretty cheap metal. But I like to get these rods. I like to push it in. I'm saying 2 to 3 foot, that bottom end. On average, there's some I've gone 4 or 5 if it's really sandy. I can already tell there's a rock out there. But we're gonna get our trap staked, or our drowner staked. See if I can get this bad boy in there. Close.
Yeah, good luck getting that out.
I know. But from there, another thing too, say we're in a creek That's all I trap for the most parts is creeks. I'm in the public right away. Any creek that is big enough for me to drown a beaver in, I'm setting a beaver drowner in the spring. There will be 2-year-olds that travel up it. I have a lot of bridges that are very good and you'll catch 4, 5, 6, up to 8 beaver. And then there's other bridges where you won't catch hardly any, but normally in the spring, if you're there long enough, if there's enough water, you'll catch at least one there. So I like to set them at almost every bridge. That'd be the same thing for you guys if you're trapping private ground over here. Any creek on a piece of private ground, that if it dumps into a bigger system or it's big enough for a beaver to swim up, I'd be setting that 100%. So, and another thing too, you gotta imagine in a creek setting, which you guys got some nice looking creeks over here I saw on the drive over here. You gotta imagine there's some current coming down here. I almost always like to put this drowner on the up current side of where my trap's gonna be, because that beaver, he's either coming from upstream and he's gonna float past before he smells this, and then he's gonna come up and into it, or he's coming from downstream and he's gonna come up and into it. I feel like just having this on this side of the rod, I feel like it can channel him a little bit better. That's also a personal preference of mine. I don't know if it's actually factual or not, but we'll get our trap put in here. One thing I do love about the TS85 is it's one of the easiest traps to set as far as beaver traps go. You guys can tell it's got a big area it can cover. So now for depth, I like to look anywhere. 4 is a little shallow, but I will set it in 4. Ideally, I'm in that 6 to 8 range because I'm targeting a back foot with this big old trap. And I set it back a little. It all depends on the bank, but as long as you're finding kind of that depth range. And another thing that's very important, I always grab it by these levers and I make dang sure that it's stuck in the mud. If it's really silty stuff, I'm probably not gonna be able to do it here. You can take a clod of grass off the bank or something, stick that down there. It works for sand too. You can stick that down there on the bottom and then set your trap on that. It works just fine. But we got this trap now. You guys can see how deep I set it. Hopefully I don't catch myself. But that's about what I'm looking for. I can put my hand on that pan and it's about to my wrist. That's about what I do almost every time. That to me is ideal. I want the back foot. I have had them on a front foot where they'll get out of this because the trap's so big they can get underneath of it. But always targeting the back foot for the most part. And I use a caster. Those of you guys that have watched my videos, I use Big Pile. I absolutely love Big Pile. It's the only beaver lure that I use, and it catches a lot of beaver. But then again, we come back to when I said I like to keep it as simple as possible. Running 100 drowners, I don't have time to fiddle between 3 or 4 different lures and decide which one I want to use where. So I just use one. I gotta find a little bit of a stick. It's actually about right. Take that, I'll get a dab of lure on there. I don't like to use it sparingly, but I kind of do at the same time. About like that's what I would do. And I'm putting that stick in this set maybe right about at that level. So like I said, I'm setting that trap in deep water, and the reasoning that I got this stick 6 or 8 inches up from the water's edge, I got this normally dug deep enough to where when that beaver comes up here, he's gonna be still at surface level when he gets here because that water's so deep. But he's gonna pick his head up right here and put his nose right there. I call that the nose stick because that's right where they're gonna go. That's where all the smell is. They put their nose on that. Well, what happens when they lift their head up? Their back feet are gonna go down. Then he's gonna get caught in that trap, go down the drowner, and be done for. That's my #1 set. That's probably 95% of my trap line. It'll be this set right here, and it works great. But is there any questions on any of that stuff so far?
Is your ledge that you got your trap on, is that, you like that level, or do you keep it as slanted at the? I
like to keep it level. However, there's certain spots where you just can't get it level. I have had it to where you can have it at a little bit of an angle and still catch them as long as it's bedded solid. I think, especially when they're coming in there with their landing gear, that's what I call it, their feet coming down, I think they do come down at a little bit of an angle. So a little bit of an angle is not going to hurt it much. But other than that, I like to keep it as level as I can, wrist deep water for me normally, and get them by the back foot. So any other questions before we move on here?
How far is your caster off the water usually?
This right here, normally I'm running it, I mean it's probably 5 or 6 inches.
And
What?
then your mud pile, is it that high or is it higher?
Usually, this is actually a very good example of about exactly what I would run. There wouldn't be all this green grass because everything's dead in the spring, but other than that, this is basically exactly what I do. And I like to even, in certain spots, if you got this right here, and say you find a spot where there's a log that goes into the water right here, then I'll really slam a set in right there because they're channeled between my rod and that log now, and it's a dead beaver swimming for the most part, unless you get water fluctuation, which is never fun. Typically, I like to keep this submerged fully. I don't like it sticking out. It's a personal preference. Here, I don't think I'm going to be able to get it out anyways. Here, I just cover it up like that. That's another personal thing. I don't like rebar sticking out of the water. Other than that, any other questions on the basic caster mount?
Do you have any preference on how you put that trap in, with the levers up or down or to the side?
I mean, I like it. I like them coming between the jaws for sure. I've always set my traps that way. That's just the way I've done it. You can ask 10 guys and you'll get 12 different answers. That's the way I do it. That's the way I was always told to do it, through the jaws and not over them. So I better pull that out just to show it. This is what I'm talking about by through the jaws. I'm bringing them to that set through the jaws, where if you have them like this, you know, there's a chance they can flip that up. But if you have it like this, even with a TS85, they can step right here and they ain't gonna set that trap off. They gotta be out here. That's why I do it facing that direction. And as far as avoiding coon, guys, I don't care what anyone says. At least where I'm from in Iowa, there's so many coons. Even with 5 pounds of pan tension and setting that deep, you'll still catch coons. So if you're out there and you're catching coons in your beaver set and you don't know why, it happens a lot, I promise you.
Is that just factory chain? You've trimmed anything off?
Yep.
Okay.
It's all just factory. And for the most part, when you buy TS85s, most of the time their pan tension's already set just about right, in my opinion. The only problem I've ever had with those traps is a little pin on a little nut on the bottom coming loose and the pan will slide around. But other than that, I've never had a problem with any of them. So, I'll move on to one of my mix-up sets here. Maybe. Might be kind of difficult. I need that stick. So I started doing this set actually last year. I really started using it quite a bit. Essentially, it's like a fish stick for coons, but it's for beaver. And I absolutely love this set too. So it's going to be kind of difficult with the depth, but I'll show you kind of essentially what's going on here. Whether there's an old post, like if these posts were in, or these vertical posts were in 8 or 10 foot of water, or 10 inches of water, wow. That'd be perfect spots for this set too, already existing structure. But basically, imagine I'm in, say, the middle of the creek, just random spot in the middle of the creek. Actually, probably should do it over here. If I can get this in the pot. Normally I'll have that stick, that's about right, honestly. But I'll put that out in the middle of the creek, and this set right here has caught me beaver in spots that I couldn't catch them in a caster mount. I don't know why. I don't know if someone had trapped them there already and they were educated. Not sure what the deal was, but we'll basically, the way I'll set this one, I'll kind of just run my drowner over here anywhere. Really, it's not that, maybe I won't. It's not that much of a crucial thing. I'm not gonna be able to get that all the way in there. But for this set, I'm gonna take this trap, and I like 8 to 10 inches of water for this set. So we got a stick in the creek, the current's coming this way, and I'm gonna bed this trap. I wouldn't say there's an exact science to it, but I'd bed it back. I'll put both my arms on there. I'd bed it back right about there, maybe even a little further. In 8 to 10 inches of water. And then why I do that is because we're going to put some lure on here, and it's the same concept of getting that beaver's head to come up. All I do for this, I'll grab a little lure and I'll smear it up here pretty high, higher than some of the other guys that use this set do it, but again, I'm 4, 5, 6 inches off the water. And those beavers swim down, and when they smell that, they're either going to turn just like a caster mount, or they're going to be coming up and come at it this way. Obviously, this would be completely underwater, but that beaver's going to approach this set. His nose is going to come up from the water's edge, and once he does that, his feet are going to drop down. He's going to get caught in this old trap here and be done for. So, is there any questions on this set? This is a great set. If you can't catch them in a caster mount, this is a great way to do it with a foothold for sure. So, anyone got any questions on that one?
Saying, say you've got one that's caster shy on the bank, that might change his mind, huh?
Oh yeah, I had one crick. This is the best example I have of this. I had one crick, I trapped it for a week and a half, never caught a beaver there. I put one of these sets in for the last 2 checks, and I had 2 beaver there in those checks. So, and I've done that at a couple other locations too, with great success. For the most part, I'm running that set right there. If that won't get them, and I know there's beaver there, I'm putting in one of these. Pretty basic stuff, really. We can't do any like dam break or anything in Iowa, so I don't do any of that. Crossovers, I don't really set any of them either, because we just don't have the dams. I can imagine you guys are probably pretty similar. But there will be cricks even with no beaver sign in them at all, and I'd highly recommend still setting them in the spring, because those 2-year-old beaver are going to be traveling through there to establish their territory. So,
why is that? Why are the 2-year-olds traveling?
2-year-olds is when they get kicked out of the den. Basically, their parents kick them out, and they have to go establish their own territory. They're no longer under mom and dad's wing anymore, and they have to go figure it out on their own. So that's why they're getting kicked out. They cover a lot more ground than I think we know. But yeah, they're very vulnerable when they're doing that. They just got kicked out of their parents' house. They're off to see the world, and then they find a caster mount, and then hopefully you catch them.
Do you have any idea how far they go?
I would hate to even put a number on it. Miles, many miles. I've caught them in cricks. A crick that dumps into our main river where I'm at, I've caught them 12 to 15 miles from there, up in that creek, swimming up in there. Now, did they come from the river, or did they come from somewhere in between? You never know.
Red, where it's all determined by habitat.
Yep.
With a lot of habitat, they don't kick them very far.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've even seen where 2-year-olds that get kicked out, they'll move downstream 50 yards and establish their own colony right there. So.
So do you trap mostly in the spring? You don't trap in the fall?
I'm too busy coon trapping in the fall, so I try and get after them in the spring. I think they're a lot more vulnerable in the spring to catch them in this set right here than they are in the fall. They just react to that better because, you know, caster's a territorial thing. They're going out to establish a territory, or maybe they got there before you did and they've already tried to establish their own territory, and then you show up with this. It's like they moved into their house for 2 days and then the bank shows up and kicks them out. I mean, they get pretty mad about it. So, any more questions on anything foothold related? Because I'm going to get into some 330 stuff here. No? Okay. Oh man. Getting a workout.
You need to get in shape.
Not wrong. Okay. So I don't run a whole lot of 330s just because in Iowa we have so many daggum otters and we can't keep any of them in the spring. But I will find an occasional bank den or two, and I will set them if I find them, because if you do find them, they're a very good set. I'll kind of explain what I got going on here. Trigger configuration, I'm really not worried about. Again, like I said, I'm not trying to catch a small beaver. I'm just trying to, or a smart beaver. I'm just trying to catch the cream of the crop and move on. So, got our 330 here. You can see my trigger configuration is all jacked up from last year, but I just basically run a standard V. That right there, I'd set. Then I got these cable extensions on here that I made. They got a little adjustable loop on the end of them. That way I can stake them to a tree or limb or rebar stake, whatever I want to stake them to. But I'll kind of explain this on dry land first. I got a lot of my 330 methods from 330 Maniac on YouTube. That guy's an animal. But basically, I'm not going to use a stabilizer or nothing at all. I'm just going to use what's around me. All I ever use for 330s is sticks. I should probably leave them on. But essentially, if there's a bank den or a lodge, whatever you got going on, you get in that water, and most of the time you can feel it with your boot, but there will be it's almost like a little ditch in the bottom. And if you find that, man, oh man, you're gonna catch some beaver most of the time. But depending on the depth, I'll either set my trap like this, and I'll run 2 sticks through the side, and normally I'll lay another stick over the top, which I'll show here in a second. Or if it's deep enough, I'm running this trap like this. I'm gonna take my stick here, and I run 1 stick through the springs, and I like a girthier stick for doing this, about like this actually. And that's basically what my set's gonna look like. And then I'm gonna add another stick that's gonna run right between the jaws here, and that's gonna keep that trap from swiveling if anything hits it. They call it a swivel stick. It's more of an anti-swivel stick. But basically all we're doing is say my run is right about where I made this caster mound, and I can feel it right there. I'm gonna put my trap in without hopefully catching my boot. Make sure it's on the bottom. I'll push that stake in. And if your trap swivels at all when you put it in the water, you can always keep this chain tight. And normally you can swing it however you want to. But then we're gonna take this swivel stick, and normally I'll just feel down, because if I'm doing this type of set, it's too deep for me to see. You'll feel down in there, feel one jaw, come over it, go like this, feel okay, I'm in between the jaws, and then you push that stick in. That set's rock solid. That 330 is not going anywhere. That's one way that I'll set up runs. And then I'll stake this off either on a rebar. I really don't want to pull another rebar stake out right now. But either rebar or something just off to the side. Most of the time, especially with this longer setup, the beaver will be all the way over here out of the run and floating in the 330. So that's one way I do it. For a run, pinch points. Pinch points I like more of a dive set. But we'll get into a dive set now, which I use on bank dens too. But essentially, we're taking this trap, finding the middle of our run. I always hold it by the springs all the way out here. Find the middle of the run, say the middle of the run's right there. You're gonna take 1 stick, run it through one side, not through that eye of the spring though. I run them through the actual springs themselves. Run 1 through there. I don't have the best sticks in the world for this, but then we're gonna find our other one. We're gonna run maybe another stick right through there. And then we got that trap's rock solid right there. The only other thing I'll do to this, and this is great for pinch points in a creek, really great otter set if you're wanting to catch any otters. But I'll take a stick. Normally I try and find one that's big and long and it's got a bow in it, so I can take that bow and shove it in the dirt over there and basically just have it going over that. It'll get them to go right underneath that trap, especially if you have open water, you know. They can be swimming on the surface too, and that'll get them to duck. But this stick is a terrible example because it's just floating. Like I said, normally I like a longer stick that I can kind of spear into the bottom out there and then have it come all the way across. So, and we can't do half submerged 330s. I don't know if Nebraska can or not, but we can in Iowa. I wish we could, but that's how I do my 330s for the most part. Is there any questions about using 330s at all? It's probably the cheapest system you'll find, just sticks. You don't have to buy nothing, and if you lose them, there's a lot more normally laying around.
How often do you use sets like that?
On every line that I run, I'd say 8 or 10 times a spring I'm using this probably.
Yeah.
There's just not that many spots where I'm at.
Gotcha.
To use 330s, and you can use them, they're very effective, but where I'm at, you're gonna catch so many daggum otters. I just try and avoid using them. I like using the footholds. Can you throw me that?
How long is your cable extension?
I think it's about 4 foot. I just cut it the length of my table, and I make it just like that. With the adjustable loop, I'll go into that a little bit more while we're here. So basically, if you guys have ever played with cable at all, this is just a double ferrule. And you can use a single ferrule. I only have double ferrule, so I just really crimped on another double ferrule. But you can see I slid the one on here and brought the tag end of this cable around and ran it through there again. Then I crimped this other swivel on the end of that. And that allows for that loop to be adjustable to any limb or stake, whatever you want to use. Pretty slick. You can use it for a lot more than just beaver too, and it works just great. But another thing about beaver trapping is it's very hard work. And you got to try and minimize the wear and tear on myself as much as I can. And I didn't come up with this, but I love using it. This is a new one, but I made these just a little piece of dowel there. I think these are 8 inches long, I want to say. I just cut them, run a little bit of cable through there. You can see that same adjustable loop that I had on that. And what I do with this is I'm putting these on beaver's feet, whether there's one and I can do both the front feet, or 2 and I can do a front foot in each one, and then I can carry them like a suitcase. If you guys have trapped beaver, you know how fun it is to carry a beaver. Yep, it sucks to carry them. This makes it a lot easier on your hands. And I love this. I'll never beaver trap without one of those again, unless I forget it. But there's another trick that I have. For those of you that have beaver trapped know, creek banks tend to suck sometimes and they're extremely steep. And there was a lot of spots I wanted to beaver trap, but the bottom line was I couldn't get out of there if I was carrying a beaver. I'd have to go all the way down the creek and climb out somewhere. So it's a lot easier to climb a bank if you can use your hands and feet than just your feet and your hands of a 40 or 50 pound beaver. So I came up with this cable extension that I use now. Probably going to be a disaster pulling this thing out, but I keep it in my back pocket like you guys just saw me pull it out. I got this little loop right here. It's just a ferrule crimped on there. And what I'll do is I'll run this through the back loop of my pants on a steep bank and just connect it to my pants. That gives me all limbs to climb out of there. And I got this cinched on the beaver that's down in the creek on his foot, and once I climb out of there I can just pull the beaver up like a fish. So there's just a couple things that'll make your life a lot easier for sure. I know they made mine a lot easier. So any questions at all, guys, feel free to ask.
Are you scouting your beaver like you do your raccoon?
Yes and no. More or less, I drive around the creeks, and if I think a beaver can swim up it, I mark it. And then I find just all these bridges. Basically what I'm doing, I'm finding creeks and I'm going to every single location I can on that creek. And if a creek is good to beaver trap, I'm trapping. Our bridges in Iowa are every 3/4 of a mile to a mile in my area. And I'll set every single one. So don't be afraid to really load an area up. But back to that, I scout out the system, but I'm not looking for sign at all. Coon scout, I'm looking straight for sign. Beaver, I'm not looking for sign at all usually.
Are you setting both sides of the creek on the bridge, or are you setting just whichever side's easiest to go up and down?
Wherever the best side to put one of these in is usually. That's what I like to do. If we have enough water. The last couple of years we've been so low on water, the creek kind of tells me where I have to put it, wherever the deep spot is. But
How do you justify putting in more than one set or 3 sets? Do you ever see something you're like, I'm going to do 5 here and I normally only do 2?
it depends. I almost never run more than 2. Almost never. I like to stick to 1 because I like to be able to run a line for a whole week. On a 48-hour check, I check every other day. I run 2 different lines. But I normally always put 1 because I look at it as if I'm checking every other day throughout the week, I'm going to get 3 checks on that. If I take 3 beaver out of every creek, that's pretty dang good. I'm not going to do that, but I like to spread my traps out more and cover the risk of, say, one area they're not swimming and the other one they do. I like to be able to cover massive amounts of area in a hurry. So
how many traps do you have on?
I like to run 100 at a time. Like I said, I'll split them up. So I'll run 50 one day, 50 the next day. It works great because we have that extended check law on a set that's designed to ground the animal. And kind of back to the multiple traps. The only time I really set 2 is if there's actually beaver sign there. If there's community beavers, what I call them, if there's community beaver there and there's sign there, then I'll set 2, usually.
I know you say you get the premium trout. A lot of us are trying to get that we're in there after something else.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you're in there after someone's already trapped it, that stick, I promise you, it works really good. I was very skeptical when I started using it. Catches a lot of beaver.
I didn't hear you mention it, but how often do you relure? You're probably already gone by the time you relure.
Yeah, for the most part. That's another reason why I like that lure so much. I feel like the color of it, which this would probably go for most dark colored lures, but I feel like that really sticks to the stick. I like to find peeled sticks is what I like to use. And that color of that will almost dye it to where I can even see it from the road. If I'm looking down, I can see there's still lure on the set. So unless it floods, if it floods, then I'll relure. But even if like a rain right now, there will probably still be lure on it. But I like to keep all the lure on that stick. I don't want them coming up here and looking at the sides or anything. I like to know exactly where their nose is going to go.
How far will that lure pull a beaver?
Depends. I've never seen one do it, but I trap some pretty big rivers. I'd say 50 to 70 feet wide, and I've caught plenty of beaver in a set like that. It all depends on where they're swimming. I like to, on bigger systems like that, I like to make sure I'm in the deeper channel of the river when I'm setting it over there. Because most of the time that's where they're going to swim, is in that deeper channel if they're traveling. So, I don't know. I mean, it depends on the wind direction and all that stuff too. I don't factor any of that stuff in because it changes so much, but that's pretty much all I do, guys. Is there any other questions?
How many beaver you catch last year?
I caught 257 beaver last year. And like I'm saying, guys, with this set, I'm going after traveling beaver. And in an area that, like, if people think of Minnesota or somewhere up north, everyone's like, oh yeah, that's a big beaver state. Well, Iowa, people don't think of it as a beaver state. But in the spring, if you get the sets out in the creeks, and I'm sure it's the same here, it's pretty similar on this side of Nebraska, especially as it is to where I'm at. If you get the sets out in the creeks, you'll catch a lot more than you think are there. I'd almost guarantee it. So, that 200, yeah, I caught 257 last year in about 6 weeks of trapping.
You put them up all yourself?
Yep.
Did you market it? How did you market it?
I just sold them all finished. I sold the pelt, tried to move the skulls, but skulls are tough because everyone was scared of the demand for the pelt so high. Everyone thought a lot of beaver were gonna get killed. But the pelt, most years the skull, tails, oil sacks, caster. I got a market for the meat this year. There's a lot to sell off of almost every animal anymore.
People who haven't ate beaver before, you're really missing something.
I want to try it this year. I've never tried it.
Missing something. Delicious.
Yeah. Is there any? I swear I heard another one over here.
Do you do any snaring?
No, I don't. I run this because I can use that extended check. We can't use a drowner. Well, you can put a snare on a drowner, I believe, but it's still a 24-hour check because to be a legal extended check set where I'm at, the trap that you're using on that drowner has to be fully submerged. So if you fully submerge the snare and ran it on a drowner, I don't know, but I stay away from snares. There's too many misses and deer knock them down. Coons get in them really bad. It's a mess. I try and stick with, and like when I was talking, this basic set that I made is 95% of my trap line. That's all I do. I just make a lot of them. Keep it as simple as you can and go as fast as you can is what I do. So, anything else?
I know you're 100% right, Cam. If you ever see that dam, you're like, I'm just gonna go beaver trap.
Beaver dams?
I just say that to you too because I know that you're just so focused on raccoons.
In the fall,
I trap every place.
in the fall, if there's a big beaver dam, I'll throw in 2 caster mounts almost every time.
So I'm just curious.
If there's a dam. Now the other creeks, if there's no dam or anything, I'll just wait for the spring. If there's a dam, I know I can take 6 or 7 out of there in the fall most of the time. I mean, anywhere from 4 to 7 usually, because those 2-year-olds are still there. And then you come through in the spring and you catch another couple that are trying to take over in there. So
Sometimes it's good just to break it up a little bit.
yeah. Yeah, and with how dry it is this year, you'll be able to tell where the beaver are pretty quickly, because they'll have it all dammed up. So, yeah, would highly recommend that handle though, guys. It'll save your hands a lot. You can do it with rope, cable, even chain, probably, whatever. Pretty simple little deal there.
It works pretty good for tunes too.
Oh yeah. Yep. Just carry them basically like a briefcase. And then this thing I got works phenomenal too. Our bridges are terrible sometimes. This is really nice to have. So, yep, that's what I do. I run with one lure, make, for the most part, one set, keep it simple, and make quite a few of them.
What was the name of your lure again?
It's Dunlap's Big Pile.
Okay.
I love that lure. It was kind of the first thing, when I started beaver trapping, it was kind of the first thing I had luck with, and I never looked back. I tried a couple other things and had success, but when I started using that, man. Plus it's got that color that I talked about, to where if it's on a bright colored stick, I can see it from the bridge. So I know that there's still lure there too. And I don't put any lure in the mud or anything like that. I like to be able to see that there's still lure there too. I don't like playing the guessing game, I guess. I don't like putting it in the mud and guessing if it's still there or not. I like to have it on the stick so I can see it.
Probably looking down from the bridges most of the time.
Yeah.
Not walking down there.
No, not every day. Unless it floods and I gotta fix everything. Other than that, no. I will say the one thing, which you guys will probably deal with in some sandier creeks, is you'll have sand that'll silt underneath of your pan. You gotta make sure that you unsilt them, because it's a mess. Just pull all that stuff, lift your trap up, pull all that stuff out of there, put it back in there. Or you can put, I've found that if you put a log or something on the upstream side of your trap, if you're having silting in problems, it seems like all that silt will settle in front of the log, kind of avoid your trap a little bit. I haven't had the best success with it, but I'd say it definitely improved a couple spots. So, silting's no fun. It's no fun.
With your caster mound set, you like the rebar drowning rod under the water, you said. What if the water level drops? Are you simply moving the trap, or are you taking the whole drowning system out and moving it so it is underwater?
A lot of the times I'll actually move the entire thing, especially if I know the water level is going to be going down. I'll actually move it, say, a foot from the bank, and then I'll just extend the chain all the way out there to know that for a couple days I'm in good depth and it's completely submerged. Either that, or if I'm feeling lazy and I got, say, the rod is up here, the water dropped, and I can slide the trap down and still have enough water to drown it, I'll just take something like this and run it along there. Most of the time it's a corn stalk or something that I'll use. I try not to use green sticks, because then they're going to focus on that thing if it's covering my rebar. But other than that, that's pretty much it. Any other questions? Anyone want to watch me fall down this creek bank? Because it might happen when I get out of here.
You, here you just constructed your set with your hand. Do you ever use a mattock or a trowel? Or
Nope, just my hands. I hate wearing gloves because I can't feel anything. If it's cold out, I have hand gloves. They come up to here and they're waterproof. They're similar, like mixing for chemicals and stuff. But I will wear those if it's like 20 degrees out. Really cool. Other than that, I'm using bare hands. I don't carry a shovel or nothing. For the most time, I got quite a few of these. For the most part, if I can't do something with my hands, I can gouge this in there enough where I can bust it apart enough to get some leverage on it, pull it out that way. But that's pretty much it, guys. Appreciate y'all coming out here.